He dedicated his entire life to his family, until his son called him a useless old man. The next morning, he changed every lock in the house without saying a word. That quiet act echoed louder than any scream. In the end, it wasn't him begging to come back. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. I promise that this will be the best story you will hear in your life. For 43 years, Robert Caldwell had lived in the same two-story house on Maple Street in the small town of Millfield, Pennsylvania. It was the home where he had raised his children, where he had loved his wife Eleanor until her final day, and where he now lived alone, surrounded by memories that whispered from every corner. At 72, his life had settled into a rhythm as predictable as the grandfather clock in his living room, a gift from Eleanor on their 25th anniversary. Every morning, Robert woke at precisely 5:30 a.m., a habit formed during his 35 years at the steel mill. He would make his bed with military precision, brew a pot of coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in it, and settle into his worn leather armchair by the window to watch the neighborhood come to life. His routines were simple but sacred: gardening on Tuesdays and Fridays, grocery shopping on Wednesdays, visiting Eleanor's resting place on Sundays. The neighbors had grown accustomed to seeing him tending to his immaculate lawn, his weathered hands still strong and capable, despite the arthritis that had begun to twist his fingers. Children would wave as they passed, and he would nod back with a slight smile, the most expression his stoic face typically allowed. He wasn't unfriendly, just a man of few words who had learned long ago that actions spoke louder than any declaration. Robert's son, Michael, lived just 20 minutes away with his wife Diane and their two children, Emma and Jack, aged 10 and 8. Their visits had grown less frequent over the years, usually limited to obligatory holiday gatherings and occasional Sunday dinners that felt more like a duty than a pleasure. The conversations were strained, revolving around the weather or the children's activities, never venturing into anything meaningful. Michael had followed a different path than his father. Where Robert had been content with his blue-collar life and simple pleasures, Michael had pursued wealth and status with single-minded determination. He had a law degree from Penn State, a partnership at a prestigious firm in the city, and the trappings of success that came with it: the luxury car, the vacation home in the Poconos, the country club membership. That Sunday in early autumn started like any other family dinner. Robert had spent the morning preparing pot roast, Eleanor's recipe, with potatoes and carrots from his garden. He had set the table with the good china, the one they had received as a wedding gift and only used for special occasions. He had even picked a bouquet of late-blooming dahlias from his garden for the centerpiece. When Michael's sleek SUV pulled into the driveway at precisely 4:00 p.m., Robert stood at the window, watching as his grandchildren tumbled out, immediately racing to the tire swing he had hung from the old oak tree. Diane followed, carrying a store-bought apple pie in an elegant box. Michael emerged last, checking his phone before reluctantly sliding it into his pocket. "Grandpa!" Emma shouted, running to Robert as he opened the front door. Her arms wrapped around his waist, and for a moment the weight in his chest lightened. Jack approached more cautiously, offering a high five instead of a hug, already mimicking his father's reserved demeanor. Dinner began pleasantly enough. The children chatted about school and friends, filling the silence that the adults seemed unwilling to breach. Robert noticed Michael checking his watch repeatedly, his attention clearly elsewhere. "Is something wrong with the roast, Michael?" Robert finally asked, noticing his son had barely touched his food. "It's fine, Dad," Michael replied without looking up. "Just not very hungry." Diane shot her husband a warning glance. "The meal is wonderful, Robert. Thank you for going to all this trouble." "No trouble," Robert said quietly. "Your grandmother's recipe. She always said food tastes better when made with—" "Yes, with love," Michael interrupted, rolling his eyes slightly. "We've heard that story 100 times, Dad." The table fell silent. Even the children sensed the tension, their forks scraping against plates the only sound in the room. "I was thinking," Robert began after a moment, "maybe next weekend we could take the kids fishing at Miller's Pond. Jack mentioned wanting to learn last time, and I still have my old Dad." "We're busy," Michael cut in, his tone clipped. "Some of us still have active lives and responsibilities. The firm has me working on the Westridge merger, and the kids have soccer and piano lessons. Michael, Diane hissed, glancing apologetically at Robert. What? I'm just saying. Michael pushed his plate away. Dad, you need to understand that we can't drop everything for fishing trips. Times have changed. This isn't the 1970s anymore. Robert nodded slowly, his face betraying nothing of the hurt building inside him. I understand. Just thought it might be nice for the children to... To what? Learn how to bait a hook. How's that going to help them get into a good college? Michael's voice had risen now, years of unspoken resentment bubbling to the surface. They need skills for the future, not outdated hobbies. Michael, that's enough, Diane said firmly, placing her hand on his arm. But Michael was on a roll now. All the frustrations of recent months, the pressure at work, the arguments with Diane, the financial strain of maintaining their lifestyle. Finding an easy target in his father. You know what your problem is, Dad? You've never adapted. You're stuck in the past with your gardening and your fishing and your endless stories about Mum. Life goes on. People move forward. Emma's eyes had filled with tears and Jack stared intently at his plate, shoulders hunched. You're right, Robert said quietly, his dignity intact despite the verbal assault. Times change, and you haven't, Michael shot back. Look at this place. Nothing's changed in 20 years. Same furniture, same photos, same routines. While the rest of us are out there living real lives, you're just existing. A useless old man clinging to memories instead of making something of the time you have left. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Diane gasped. Even Michael seemed shocked by what had come out of his mouth, his anger giving way to immediate regret. Dad, I didn't mean... Robert stood slowly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Without a word, he walked to the kitchen and returned with the apple pie. He set it gently in the center of the table, then retrieved plates from the cabinet. Who would like dessert? He asked, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Later, after they had gone, Michael avoiding his eyes as they left, Diane hugging him too tightly and whispering apologies. The children subdued and confused. Robert sat alone in his kitchen. The dishes were washed and put away, the leftovers carefully stored in containers, the table wiped clean of any evidence of the disastrous dinner. In the silence of his home, those 3 words echoed in his mind. Useless old man. For hours, Robert sat motionless, remembering the day he had taught Michael to ride a bicycle, the nights he had worked double shifts to pay for braces and school trips, the pride he had felt watching his son graduate from college, the first Caldwell to do so. He remembered Eleanor's words on her final day. Take care of our boy, Robert. Remind him who he is when he forgets. As midnight approached, Robert rose from his chair, decision made. He wasn't angry. Anger required too much energy. But something fundamental had shifted inside him, something that could never be put back the way it was. The next morning, when the locksmith's van pulled into his driveway at 8:01 a.m. sharp, Robert was waiting, a list in hand and determination in his eyes. All of them? The locksmith asked, eyebrows raised as he reviewed Robert's list. His name tag read Frank, and the creases around his eyes suggested he was close to Robert's age. Every lock in the house, Robert confirmed, his voice quiet but firm. Front door, back door, side entrance, basement, even the garden shed. Frank nodded, asking no further questions. Perhaps he had seen this before. The determined look of a man reclaiming something essential that had been taken from him. By noon, the work was complete. 5 new sets of keys lay on the kitchen counter, gleaming in the sunlight that streamed through the window. Robert paid in cash, adding a generous tip that Frank tried to refuse. Keep it, Robert insisted. You did good work today. After the locksmith left, Robert stood in his living room, surrounded by familiar belongings that somehow felt different now. The grandfather clock ticked steadily, marking time in a house where something fundamental had changed. Robert picked up 1 set of keys and slipped them into his pocket. The weight of them was reassuring, solid, a tangible reminder of his decision. He spent the afternoon in his garden, methodically weeding the vegetable beds and harvesting the last of the season's tomatoes. The physical labor helped quiet his mind, the rich soil beneath his fingers connecting him to something enduring. Eleanor had loved this garden. A piece of forever, she had called it. Something alive that outlasts us. At 5:37 p.m., Robert's phone rang. Michael's name flashed on the screen. He let it go to voicemail. 10 minutes later, it rang again, and again. By evening, there were 7 missed calls and 3 text messages, each more urgent than the last. "Dad, call me back." "Dad, we need to talk about yesterday." "Dad, this is ridiculous." "Answer your phone." Robert ate his dinner, leftover pot roast, at the kitchen table, the newspaper open beside his plate as always. He read each article thoroughly. Even the obituaries, a habit formed over decades. The phone continued to ring intermittently throughout the evening, but the sound seemed distant, belonging to another life. Before bed, Robert stood at his bedroom window, looking out at the neighborhood. Lights glowed in nearby houses. Families gathered for dinner, children finishing homework, couples sharing the details of their day. Normal lives unfolding in predictable patterns. His own life had followed such patterns for so long that this deviation felt almost dizzying. Tuesday morning brought the expected knock at the door. Robert was in the garden trimming his rose bushes when he heard Michael's car pull into the driveway. He continued his work, carefully pruning each stem, removing dead leaves and spent blooms. "Dad." Michael's voice carried across the yard, followed by the sound of the doorbell, then knocking, then more insistent pounding. "Dad, I know you're home. Your car is here." Robert set down his pruning shears and walked slowly around to the front of the house. Michael stood on the porch, his tie loosened, hair slightly disheveled, a rare state of disarray for his always polished son. "Dad," Michael said, relief washing over his face. "What's going on?" "Why aren't you answering your phone?" Robert stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, maintaining the physical distance that now matched the emotional one. "I've been busy." Michael ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "Look, about Sunday, I said some things I shouldn't have. I was stressed with work and took it out on you. I'm sorry." The words sounded rehearsed, a lawyer's careful apology designed to close a case rather than heal a wound. Robert nodded, acknowledging the apology without accepting it. "I need to borrow your weed trimmer," Michael continued, already moving on. "Mine broke and I promised Diane I'd take care of the yard this weekend." "I can't help you with that," Robert replied. Michael frowned. "Come on, Dad, I said I was sorry. Can we move past this?" "This isn't about Sunday," Robert said, though they both knew it was a lie. "I've just decided to make some changes." "What kind of changes?" Michael asked, suspicious now. "I changed the locks," Robert stated simply. "You what? Why would you—" Michael stopped, understanding dawning. "Dad, that's childish. If this is about what I said—" "My house, my decision," Robert said, the words coming easier now. "I need some time to myself." "Time?" "Dad, you have nothing but time." Michael's voice rose again, the brief contrition giving way to familiar frustration. "This is exactly what I was talking about. Instead of talking things through like adults, you're acting like a stubborn child." Robert felt a strange calm settle over him. "I think you should go now, Michael." "Unbelievable," Michael muttered, shaking his head. "Fine, have it your way. Call me when you're ready to be reasonable." As Michael's car disappeared down the street, Robert returned to his roses. The sun warmed his back as he worked, and for the first time in years he found himself humming, an old Johnny Cash song that Eleanor had loved. The days that followed fell into a new routine. Robert continued his gardening, his grocery shopping, his Sunday visits to Eleanor. But now each evening he explored a different box from the attic, containers of memories that had remained sealed since Eleanor's passing. In one, he found Michael's childhood drawings, crayon masterpieces celebrating the best dad ever and my hero. In another, report cards and school awards, each one proudly displayed on the refrigerator in their time. Photographs of fishing trips, camping adventures, father-son moments that had shaped both their lives in ways neither fully appreciated. In a small, ornate box that had belonged to Eleanor's mother, Robert discovered a collection of letters, his own love letters to Eleanor during their brief separation when he was deployed overseas. Reading them now, he barely recognized the passionate young man who had poured his heart onto those pages. Where had that man gone? When had he retreated so deeply inside himself that even his own son couldn't see him anymore? 1 week after changing the locks, Robert spotted Diane's car parked across the street. She didn't approach the house, just sat watching, her expression unreadable from a distance. An hour later, she returned with Emma and Jack in tow. This time they made their way to the front door, the children carrying handmade cards and a basket covered with a checkered cloth. Robert watched from the window as they rang the bell, waited, then rang again. Eventually, Diane knelt down to place the basket on the porch. She whispered something to the children, who carefully propped their cards against it. As they turned to leave, Jack looked back at the house, his small face creased with confusion and hurt. That look pierced Robert's carefully constructed armor, but he remained hidden behind the curtain until they had gone. Only then did he retrieve the basket, still warm and fragrant with freshly baked bread and cookies. Beneath the cloth he found a note from Diane. "The children miss you, we all do. Whatever is happening between you and Michael shouldn't affect your relationship with Emma and Jack. They need their grandfather." That night, Robert sat at his kitchen table, the children's cards open before him. Emma had drawn their family, stick figures holding hands in front of a house with "We love you, Grandpa" written in wobbly letters across the top. Jack's card was simpler, a fishing rod and the words, "Can you teach me someday?" Robert closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He had changed the locks to protect himself, to assert boundaries that had been trampled for too long. But in doing so, had he locked out the very people he most needed to keep close? Across the street, Walter Jenkins sat on his porch swing, nursing a glass of iced tea as he had every summer evening for the past 30 years. Walter had watched the Caldwell family through marriages and birthdays, arguments and reconciliations. He had been there the day Eleanor was taken away in an ambulance, never to return. Now he observed the new distance between father and son, with the quiet wisdom of a man who had lived long enough to see patterns repeat. As the streetlights flickered on, Robert stepped outside for the first time that evening. He crossed the lawn to retrieve his mail, pausing to acknowledge Walter with a nod. "Evening, Robert," Walter called. "Beautiful night." Robert hesitated, then changed course, making his way across the street to his neighbor's porch. Walter gestured to the empty chair beside him, and Robert sank into it, suddenly aware of how little human contact he'd had in the past week. "Noticed you've had some family stopping by," Walter remarked casually, refilling his glass from a pitcher and offering one to Robert, who accepted with a grateful nod. "Michael's upset with me," Robert admitted after a long silence. "I changed all the locks." Walter nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes we have to lock doors to figure out which ones matter enough to open again." The conversation with Walter lingered in Robert's mind over the following days. There was wisdom in those simple words, a truth he wasn't quite ready to face but couldn't entirely dismiss. That night, he left a small potted plant from his garden on the porch where Diane had placed the basket. It wasn't much, but it was something, an acknowledgement, a tiny bridge across the growing divide. 2 weeks after changing the locks, Robert received an official-looking letter from the county assessor's office. The property taxes on his house had increased significantly due to recent neighborhood development. As he studied the numbers, a second document caught his attention, a notice about required inspections for homes built before 1970. His house, constructed in 1962, would need to be brought up to code or face penalties. The timing struck him as suspicious. Michael had connections at the county offices through his law practice. Could this be a pressure tactic? Robert folded the papers carefully and placed them in his desk drawer. He would deal with them, but not today. That afternoon, as Robert worked in his vegetable garden, a familiar car pulled into the driveway. Not Michael's sleek SUV, but an older model sedan that brought an immediate smile to his face. His daughter Sarah emerged from the driver's side, her curly hair so like Eleanor's, catching the sunlight. "Surprise!" she called, making her way across the lawn. "I thought it was about time I visited my favorite father." Unlike Michael, who had stayed close to home, Sarah had moved to Seattle 15 years ago to pursue her career in environmental science. Her visits were rare but always filled with warmth and genuine connection. Robert stood brushing soil from his hands and accepted her embrace. "You look good, Dad," she said, stepping back to study him. "But something's different." "Just getting older," he replied with a slight shrug. Sarah shook her head. "No, it's something else. There's I don't know, a resolve about you." They moved inside, where Sarah immediately noticed the new locks. Robert brewed coffee while she explored the house, exclaiming, Over changes both subtle and significant. Photos he had rearranged. Eleanor's quilts now draped over the furniture instead of stored away. The attic boxes stacked neatly in the spare room. "You've been busy," she observed, accepting the mug he offered. "Want to tell me what's going on?" "Michael called me, you know." Robert settled into his armchair, suddenly feeling every one of his 72 years. "What did he say?" "That you're having some kind of senior crisis," Sarah replied with a wry smile. "That you changed all the locks and won't speak to him. He thinks you need intervention." "And what do you think?" Robert asked, watching her carefully. Sarah curled up on the sofa, tucking her feet beneath her just as she had as a teenager. "I think there's more to this story than Michael's telling me, so I came to hear your side." Over the next hour, Robert shared everything. The Sunday dinner, Michael's cutting words, the decision to change the locks, and the week of reflection that followed. Sarah listened without interruption, her expression shifting from surprise to anger to understanding. "Oh, Dad," she said when he finished. "I'm so sorry. Michael had no right to speak to you that way." "Maybe he did," Robert admitted, surprising himself. "Maybe there's some truth to what he said. I've been stuck since your mother left us, living in the past instead of the present." "There's nothing wrong with honoring memories," Sarah insisted. "Mom wouldn't want you to forget." "Not forget, no, but move forward, perhaps." Robert sipped his coffee, finding it easier to articulate thoughts that had been forming over the past weeks. Changing the locks wasn't just about keeping Michael out. It was about deciding who and what I let in. Sarah stayed for 3 days. They cooked together using Eleanor's recipes, watched old movies, and spent hours looking through family albums. Sarah shared stories about her work protecting marine ecosystems and her relationship with Olivia, her partner of 5 years. Robert listened, asking questions, genuinely interested in her life in a way that made her comment, "You know, Dad, you're a much better listener than you used to be." On her second evening, Sarah convinced Robert to walk to Millfield's community centre, where a local jazz trio was performing. It was the first social event he had attended since Eleanor's passing, and though he felt awkward at first, the music soon transported him to happier times. "Your mother loved jazz," he told Sarah, as they walked home under starlit skies. "Our first date was at a little club in Philadelphia. She wore a blue dress that matched her eyes." "I never knew that," Sarah said, slipping her arm through his. "Tell me more about young Robert and Eleanor." The stories flowed easily now, memories he had kept locked away for fear they would hurt too much to revisit. But sharing them with Sarah, he found joy mixed with the inevitable sadness, a bittersweet cocktail that felt more honest than the numbness he had cultivated for so long. On her final morning, as they sat on the porch drinking coffee, Sarah handed him a small notebook bound in faded blue leather. "I found this among Mom's things after the funeral. I've been keeping it for the right moment." Robert opened it carefully. Inside, in Eleanor's distinctive handwriting, were recipes, quotations, observations about their children, and reflections on their marriage. Some entries were dated decades ago. Others appeared to have been written during her final months. "She knew she was leaving," Sarah said gently. "She wanted you to have this when you were ready." Robert's hands trembled as he turned the pages. On the last one, Eleanor had written, "Robert, remember that our love story doesn't end when I'm gone. It continues in how you live, in the joy you find, in the love you share with our children and grandchildren. Don't lock your heart away with me. That was never our agreement." Tears he had not allowed himself to shed for years now flowed freely. Sarah moved to sit beside him, her head resting on his shoulder, as they both grieved and celebrated the remarkable woman who had shaped their lives. After Sarah's departure, Robert began reading Eleanor's journal each evening, one entry at a time, savoring her words like a fine wine. Through her eyes he revisited their life together, the struggles and triumphs, the ordinary days and extraordinary moments that had formed the tapestry of their shared existence. One entry particularly struck him. Robert and Rachel argued again today over Dad's tools. Such a petty thing to divide siblings who once were inseparable. If only they could see how brief our time is, how precious family becomes as the years pass. Rachel, his sister, 5 years his junior and stubborn as the day is long. They hadn't spoken since their father's funeral 12 years ago, when a dispute over their parents' modest estate had erupted into ugly accusations and wounded pride. Rachel had taken their mother's jewelry and family photos. Robert had claimed their father's tools and workshop equipment. Neither had been satisfied with the division, and neither had been willing to compromise. Eleanor had tried to mediate, but the rift had deepened over time, hardening into a silence that eventually seemed permanent. Rachel had moved to Arizona, sent Christmas cards for a few years, then stopped altogether. Robert had no idea if she was well, if she had grandchildren now, if she ever thought of him. In the attic, among the boxes he had been systematically exploring, Robert found one labeled simply Family. Inside were old photographs of his parents, his childhood home in West Virginia, and several of him and Rachel as children, building a snowman, fishing at their grandfather's pond, standing proudly beside their first bicycle, shared, of course. Has money was always tight. One photo caught his attention, a birthday celebration, perhaps his 10th or 11th. The image had been torn down the middle and carefully taped back together, the seam running between him and Rachel as they leaned over a homemade cake. He remembered that day. Their mother had scraped together enough for a small cake and a single present for each child, despite the hard times. Robert sat heavily on the attic floor, the taped photo in his weathered hands. Who had torn it, and more importantly, who had cared enough to repair it? The careful mending spoke of regret, of a desire to preserve what had been broken. That night, Robert did something he hadn't done in over a decade. He searched for his sister online. Rachel Caldwell Martinez, now living in Tucson, a retired elementary school teacher, with 3 grown children and, yes, 4 grandchildren. Her husband, Antonio, had passed away 3 years earlier, according to an obituary Robert found with a sharp pang of regret. His brother-in-law gone without reconciliation. Before he could reconsider, Robert wrote a simple email. Rachel, it's Robert. Eleanor always said life is too short for such long silences. I'm listening now. Would you consider talking again? He hit send before courage failed him, then closed his laptop and went to bed, expecting nothing. But morning brought a reply as brief as his message. About time, big brother. Call me. Their first conversation was awkward, halting, filled with careful neutrality. But the second was easier, and by the third, they were reminiscing about their parents, filling in the gaps of their separate lives, marveling at the resilience of sibling bonds despite years of neglect. I have something of yours, Rachel said during their fourth call. Dad's pocket watch. Mom gave it to me before she passed, but it should have gone to you. He always meant for you to have it. Keep it, Robert replied. I have his tools. That's enough. No, I've held it too long. Besides, she paused, her voice softening, I have something to tell you. I'm coming east next month for a teaching conference in Philadelphia. I thought, maybe I could visit? As Robert replaced the receiver, he felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. Doors were opening, bridges rebuilding. He glanced at the calendar. 3 weeks until Rachel's visit. Time enough to prepare the guest room, to sort through photos she might want to see, to plan meals they could share. But first, there was another matter to address. The county notices still sat in his desk drawer, a bureaucratic sword hanging over his home. Tomorrow, he would visit the assessor's office and deal with whatever complications awaited him there. It was time to bring his house, literally and figuratively, into order. The county assessor's office was housed in a brutalist concrete building downtown, its interior a maze of cubicles and fluorescent lighting. Robert felt out of place among the young professionals, hurrying through the corridors, but he straightened his shoulders and approached the reception desk with determination. I need to discuss these notices, he explained, sliding the papers across the counter. The receptionist, barely older than his grandchildren, glanced at the documents and directed him to the 3rd floor. High Assessment Division, Room 302. Mr. Patterson handles properties in your area. As Robert waited for the elevator, a familiar voice called his name. Turning, he found himself face to face with Michael, briefcase in hand and surprise evident on his features. Dad? What are you doing here? County business, Robert replied, gesturing to the papers in his hand. Property assessment issues. Michael's expression shifted from surprise to concern. You should have called me. I could have handled this for you. I can manage my own affairs, Robert said, his tone firm but not unkind. The elevator arrived, and they stepped in together, and uncomfortable silence settling between them. As they ascended, Michael studied his father with new eyes, noting the straight posture, the determined set of his jaw, the quiet dignity that had always been there, but somehow seemed more pronounced now. "I have a meeting with Judge Harmon about the Westridge case," Michael offered as the elevator stopped at the second floor. "But I could cancel—" "No need," Robert interrupted. "You have your work. I have mine." The doors closed between them before Michael could respond, leaving Robert to continue alone to the third floor. There he navigated the hallways until he found room 302, where a balding man with wire-rimmed glasses reviewed his documents with bureaucratic thoroughness. "Your property was built in 1962, correct?" Mr. Patterson confirmed, typing information into his computer. "That puts it under the new ordinance for historical properties. You'll need electrical updates, a plumbing inspection, and possibly asbestos removal depending on when the insulation was last replaced." "And the tax increase?" Robert asked, keeping his voice level despite the growing concern about costs. "Standard reassessment based on neighborhood property values," Patterson explained. "The new development on the old Miller farm has raised values throughout the area. You could appeal, but frankly, it rarely succeeds." Robert left with a folder full of forms, inspection requirements, and a growing sense that his independence would come at a significant financial cost. As he crossed the building's lobby, he spotted Michael again, deep in conversation with an elegant woman in judicial robes, presumably Judge Harmon. Their eyes met briefly across the marble expanse. Michael gestured subtly, indicating he would call later. Robert nodded once, then continued through the revolving door into the autumn sunshine. That evening, Michael called as promised. The conversation was strained but civil, focusing exclusively on the county requirements. Robert explained the situation while Michael took notes, his lawyer's mind already analyzing options. "The electrical work is mandatory," Michael said after Robert had outlined the inspector's requirements. "But we might be able to get an exemption on some of the other items based on the historical nature of the property. I know someone in the zoning department who owes me a favor. I don't want special treatment," Robert insisted. "It's not special treatment, Dad. It's knowing how to navigate the system." Michael paused, then added more gently, "Let me help with this, please." Something in his son's voice, a note of genuine concern rather than condescension, made Robert reconsider his automatic refusal. "All right, but just with the paperwork. I'll handle the actual repairs and pay for everything myself." "Deal," Michael agreed, sounding relieved at this small concession. "I'll drop off some information tomorrow." True to his word, Michael appeared the following afternoon, a folder of documents under his arm. This time Robert invited him inside, though only as far as the kitchen. They sat at the table where so many family meals had been shared, the new distance between them palpable despite their physical proximity. Michael opened the folder, spreading out permit applications and inspection schedules. "I've highlighted the sections you need to complete. The electrical inspection can happen next Wednesday if that works for you." Robert nodded, reviewing the papers with careful attention. "Thank you for this." "It's nothing," Michael replied, fidgeting with his pen. After a moment of awkward silence, he added, "Sarah called me. Said she visited." "She did. She also said I'm an insensitive jerk who doesn't appreciate what I have." A hint of a smile touched Michael's lips. "She's not wrong." Robert said nothing, waiting. "Dad, about what I said that Sunday," Michael began, then faltered. "I was way out of line. The truth is, I've been under a lot of pressure. The firm is pushing for me to take on more cases. Diane and I have been arguing about my hours, and Jack's having trouble in school." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his teenage years that Robert felt a pang of recognition. "But that's no excuse for taking it out on you." "No, it isn't," Robert agreed quietly. Michael looked up, surprised by the direct response. "I guess I deserved that." "You did," Robert confirmed, then softened slightly. "But I understand pressure, Michael. I worked double shifts at the mill when you were in college, remember? 60 hours a week so you could focus on your studies instead of working part-time." "I remember," Michael admitted. I guess I forget sometimes what you've done for me. For us." The conversation shifted then, becoming more honest than any they had shared in years. Michael spoke of his fears, of failing at the firm, of disappointing Diane, of not being the father his children deserved. Robert listened, offering neither judgment nor easy solutions, just the attentive presence that Michael had unknowingly craved. As Michael prepared to leave, he hesitated at the door. "The kids miss you. Emma asks about you every day." "I miss them too," Robert acknowledged. "Maybe you could bring them by this weekend. Just them for a few hours." Michael nodded, understanding the boundary being established. "They'd like that. So would I." After Michael left, Robert returned to the kitchen table, studying the county documents with renewed focus. The path ahead would be complicated. Permits to obtain, inspections to pass, repairs to fund. But for the first time in weeks, he felt equal to the challenge. The following days brought a flurry of activity. Electricians evaluated the house's wiring, plumbers inspected pipes, and a contractor assessed the roof and foundation. Each visit revealed new issues requiring attention, and Robert methodically added them to his growing list. On Friday, Michael dropped off Emma and Jack, as arranged. The children approached the house cautiously at first, uncertain of their welcome after the strange tension of recent weeks. But when Robert greeted them with freshly baked cookies, Eleanor's recipe, and an invitation to help plant bulbs in the garden, their reservations quickly melted away. "These will bloom in spring," Robert explained as they tucked tulip and daffodil bulbs into the prepared soil. "When the ground warms up, they'll push through and bring color to the garden." "Like magic?" Emma asked, her small hands patting the earth gently over each bulb. "Like patience," Robert corrected with a smile. "Some things can't be rushed. They need time underground gathering strength before they're ready to emerge." Jack, more practical, wanted to know exactly how deep to plant each bulb and in what pattern. Robert showed him the diagram he had sketched, explaining how the different flowers would complement each other when they bloomed. The boy's attention to detail reminded Robert powerfully of Eleanor, who had approached gardening with the same methodical care. That afternoon, as they sat on the porch drinking hot chocolate, Jack asked the question that had clearly been troubling him. "Grandpa, are you and Dad fighting? Is that why you changed the locks?" Robert considered his response carefully. "Your dad and I had a disagreement. Sometimes adults need space to think things through, just like you might want to be alone in your room when you're upset. But you still love Dad, right?" Emma pressed, her eyes wide with concern. "Of course I do," Robert assured her. "Family is forever, even when we don't see eye to eye." When Michael returned to collect the children, Robert invited him in for coffee. They sat in the living room while Emma and Jack gathered their belongings. The conversation still cautious but noticeably warmer than before. "The house needs substantial work," Robert admitted, updating Michael on the inspection results. "More than I anticipated," Michael nodded thoughtfully. "Have you considered what Sarah suggested? Selling this place and moving into something smaller, more manageable?" "I've thought about it," Robert acknowledged. "But this is home. Your mother's garden, your height marks on the kitchen doorframe, the memories in every room. I'm not ready to leave that behind." "I understand," Michael said, and for once Robert believed he actually did. "Whatever you decide, we'll support you." As they were leaving, Jack turned back suddenly and wrapped his arms around Robert's waist. "I had fun today, Grandpa. Can we come back tomorrow?" "Not tomorrow," Robert said, ruffling the boy's hair. "But soon. Very soon." The following week brought Rachel's visit. Robert met her at the Philadelphia train station, instantly recognizing his sister, despite the 15 years that had passed. Her hair was silver now, her face lined with experience, but her eyes, their father's eyes, sparkled with the same mischievous light he remembered from childhood. Their embrace was awkward at first, then fiercely tight, as if making up for all the hugs they had missed. "You got old," Rachel teased as they separated. "Speak for yourself," Robert retorted, taking her suitcase. "You look just like Mom now." "The highest compliment," she replied, linking her arm through his as they walked to the parking lot. The drive home was filled with conversation, catching up on children and grandchildren, sharing health concerns and retirement activities, carefully avoiding the painful topics that had driven them apart. But that evening, as they sat in Eleanor's garden watching the sunset, Rachel broached the subject they had been circling. "I was wrong, you know," she said quietly. "About Dad's tools. You spent more time with him in that workshop than I ever did. They should have been yours all along." Robert shook his head. We were both wrong. Too stubborn to compromise, too proud to admit we missed each other. Rachel reached into her pocket and withdrew a gold pocket watch, its case worn smooth by generations of handling. I brought this for you. Dad would want you to have it. Robert accepted the watch, feeling its weight in his palm. The physical embodiment of time past and time remaining. Opening the case, he found an inscription he had forgotten. To Richard Caldwell, time is precious, family more so. 1937. Our grandfather's words, Rachel noted, watching his face. Seems they're still teaching us even now. Rachel stayed for 5 days, each one a step toward healing the breach that had separated them for too long. They visited Eleanor's resting place together, shared stories of their parents that made them laugh and cry in equal measure, and promised not to let pride stand between them again. On her final evening, Michael and his family joined them for dinner. The initial awkwardness quickly gave way to genuine warmth as Rachel regaled Emma and Jack with stories of their father's childhood mischief. Michael, seeing his father through his aunt's fond reminiscences, glimpsed aspects of Robert he had never fully appreciated. The big brother who had taught Rachel to ride a bike, the teenage son who had worked summers to help with family expenses, the young man who had stood up to neighborhood bullies on her behalf. After the family departed and Rachel had retired to the guest room, Robert sat alone in his study, contemplating the changes of recent weeks. The house around him still needed repairs. The electrical panel would be updated tomorrow, the plumbing the following week, but the more important renovations had already begun within his family. Morning came too quickly, bringing Rachel's departure. As Robert drove her to the station, she spoke of future visits, of coming for Christmas, of perhaps having him stay with her in Tucson during the coldest Pennsylvania months. Plans that just weeks ago would have seemed impossible. At the platform as her train was announced, Rachel hugged him fiercely. "Don't be a stranger, big brother. Life's too short." "I know that now," Robert assured her. "Safe travels, Rach." Watching her train pull away, Robert felt a sense of completion, one circle closed, others beginning to open. He drove home with the windows down, enjoying the crisp autumn air and the changing colors of the countryside. Life continuing, evolving, renewing itself in endless cycles. At home, he found Michael's car in the driveway, unexpected at this hour on a workday. His son sat on the porch steps, a manila envelope in his hands, his expression troubled. "What's wrong?" Robert asked, immediately concerned. "Nothing new," Michael sighed, standing to greet him. "The house repairs. I've been crunching numbers based on the estimates you shared. Dad, it's going to cost nearly $40,000 to bring everything up to code." Robert absorbed this information with outward calm, though inwardly he felt a momentary panic. His savings were substantial but not unlimited, and he had hoped to leave something for the children and grandchildren. "I'll manage," he said simply. Michael shook his head. "I have a proposal. Let me help with the costs, not a loan, an investment. This house is part of our family legacy. Someday it will be Sarah's and mine anyway. Let us contribute now while it matters." Robert's first instinct was to refuse, pride and independence running deep. But as he looked at his son's earnest expression, he recognized something new: respect. Michael wasn't offering charity or attempting to take control. He was acknowledging the value of what Robert had built and seeking to preserve it. "I'll think about it," Robert conceded, which both knew was significant progress. They walked together to the front door, where Robert paused, a decision crystallizing in his mind. From his pocket he withdrew his key ring and carefully removed a single key, the one to the front door. "Here," he said, pressing it into Michael's palm. "You should have this." Michael stared at the key, understanding its significance. "Dad, you don't have to—" "I want to," Robert interrupted. "One key, the front door only, for emergencies and Sunday dinners." Michael's fingers closed around the key, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Thank you." "Don't make me regret it," Robert warned, but his tone was gentle, even teasing. As Michael drove away, Robert stood on his porch, surveying his property, the garden Eleanor had loved, the oak tree that had supported generations of tire swings, the house that had sheltered his family through joys and sorrows, all of it requiring care, attention, investment, all of it worth the effort. Inside, Robert made his way to the kitchen and opened Eleanor's journal to an entry he had read repeatedly in recent days. "Love isn't about—" holding tight. It's about knowing when to grip firmly and when to open your hand. Robert has always been better at the former than the latter. I hope someday he learns that the greatest strength lies in vulnerability. Robert closed the journal gently and looked around his kitchen, the heart of his home. The repairs would begin tomorrow. The house would be brought up to code, made safe and sound for years to come. Michael and Diane would bring the children on Sunday. Sarah had promised to visit at Thanksgiving. Rachel would come for Christmas. For the first time in years, Robert felt the house filling with future possibilities rather than just past memories. Eleanor had been right, as she so often was. The greatest locks weren't the ones on his doors, but the ones he had placed around his heart. And the most important key wasn't the one he had given Michael, but the one he had finally used himself, the key to moving forward without leaving behind what mattered most. That evening, as dusk settled over Millfield, Robert sat on his porch swing, watching as lights came on in neighboring houses. Walter waved from across the street, raising his customary glass of iced tea in salute. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalk, calling to each other as darkness approached. Life continuing its eternal cycle of growth, change, and renewal. Robert reached into his pocket and felt the weight of his father's pocket watch. Time is precious, family more so. The simple wisdom of generations, passed down like the watch itself. Its value not in gold or craftsmanship, but in the connections it represented. Tomorrow would bring electricians and plumbers, paperwork and decisions. But tonight, in this moment of quiet reflection, Robert Caldwell felt something he had not experienced in years. Peace. Not the hollow peace of isolation, but the rich, textured peace that comes from acceptance, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again. He had changed the locks to keep others out, but in doing so, he had inadvertently opened the door to something far more valuable. The truth that independence and connection were not opposing forces, but complementary strengths. That dignity required boundaries, but life required bridges. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Robert closed his eyes and imagined Eleanor beside him on the swing. Her presence, as real as memory could make it. "You were right," he whispered to the evening air. "I'm listening now." And somewhere in the gentle evening breeze that stirred the garden she had loved, he could almost hear her reply. "It's about time, my love. It's about time." Dear listeners, we hope Robert's journey of rediscovery and healing has touched your heart as deeply as it has touched ours. The courage to establish boundaries, the strength to forgive, and the wisdom to recognize when to open our doors again are lessons we all need in our complex lives. If you've ever felt undervalued by those closest to you, or struggled to balance independence with family connections, know that you're not alone. Robert's story reminds